Hey everybody, welcome to This Podcast Should Be Played Loud. I'm joined as always by my co-host here, Chad, and today we are talking about Brian De Palma's Phantom of the Paradise. Chad, you watched this movie a couple nights ago. I watched it last night. It was a good refresher. I feel like I've shown it to people. That was that was kind of like my role for a bit, but I haven't actually sat down and really tried to unpack it in probably like a decade. But yeah. How you doing, bud?
I'm great. I rewatched it last night on my Shout Factory Blu-ray. It looked great. This feels like another one of kind of your movies, and I've seen it probably. This is maybe only my third time watching it. I saw it, I think, for the first time, maybe 10 or so years ago, when I was really doing a kind of De Palma deep dive. I would say De Palma is definitely one of my favorite filmmakers. And this is such an interesting kind of, this is such an interesting movie in his, early filmography, because it's sort of like between his, Godardian political comedies, and then as he's starting to move into his like Hitchcockian pastiche, which sort of lasted him in one way or another throughout the rest of his career.
Oh yeah.
And this one is a little bit of a tweener. Has sort of elements of both in it. And I think it's very obviously, when you watch it, a Brian De Palma movie, but it's the type of Brian De Palma movie that you could show to people who think they know what a Brian De Palma movie is and kind of knock their socks off.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and it definitely is. I mean, it's strange because it's simultaneously a product of its time and completely unlike any other film I've seen. Like you could argue that this is kind of the rock opera at its finest or at its weirdest, more so. I was comparing this in my mind to something like Rocky Horror Picture Show, and why something like Rocky Horror became such a cultural phenomenon, and why something like this kind of fell by the wayside, right?
I
But
mean, it's
yeah,
interesting reading some of the, snippets of sort of mixed reviews that it got at the time, where, it's talking about, well, it's a movie that's trying to make fun of rock and roll, which is a
right.
genre that is making fun of itself anyway, so you can't do it. And it's just funny to listen to read that kind of stuff, where it's like, wow, they just had no hindsight yet. Rock and roll was just so new that doing something like a rock opera was just, people just kind of didn't know what to make of it. And I
Right.
I also have to admit, I want you to kind of walk me through it, because I'm actually very the rock opera is a genre that is a big blind spot for me. I've seen this obviously, but really I probably only watched this because of Brian De Palma. I have not seen the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I have not seen Tommy. I haven't seen Jesus Christ Superstar, or even Hedwig. So these are a few movies that I are blind spots for me. They've all been on my list forever, obviously, but and I'm interested in seeing them, but it's just a genre that I'm a little bit ignorant of.
Well, people claim that the first time that phrase was coined was by Frank Zappa. He used it to describe this like a work in progress. Like I was a teenage malt shop. But it's something that I think was kind of an outgrowth of the explosion of rock and roll, the psychedelic revolution. I think that in the beginning, you probably have these studios that are trying to capitalize on this new generation of stars, right? Like the Beatles. So what do? I don't know. Give them a fucking movie, see what they do with it. And mostly I think that there are these movies that are just kind of outgrowths of albums, and you could argue that like Yellow Submarine is that sort of thing.
Right.
You could argue that even later examples, which I'm going to talk about Daft Punk a lot with this movie in particular because it's a huge influence on them, and a couple of French bands actually, but like Interstellar 555, that also kind of feels like just an outgrowth of the album. You could kind of call these movies like music video movies, right? Even A Hard Day's Night kind of feels that way.
Yeah.
But the rock opera is a different animal. And I feel like, I mean, I'm not the authority on it, because I also think that there's a lot of rock opera stuff that's so cornball that it's not really like, it's a hard genre to capture, because writing musicals inherently, should be left to the people that specialize in those genres. I feel like there's a lot of times where I feel like, where you get a rock guy to try to write some songs and string it together, and it's not quite the same as like, I mean, this is going to sound so dorky, but like, something that was written to be a musical, like I don't know, Oklahoma,
or like Jesus Christ Superstar, which is which is Andrew Lloyd Webber, like doing a rock musical. Yeah, like I get what you're saying. Like, just because
some of them can feel
rock
kind of
and roll songs doesn't mean you can write a musical and have them string together into a narrative.
Yes, and in the case of this film in particular, because I mean, you have stuff like you have the Who's Tommy, which kind of feels like one of the first big ones that actually incorporates a band. Because I feel like before that, stuff like Jesus Christ Superstar is Broadway reacting to what's happening in contemporary music,
right?
Wanting to bring hippies, into musical theater. But something like Tommy, to me, announces a new era where you can actually get the rock stars involved. But I think it does create a bit of a problem where it's like, whereas something like Andrew Lloyd Webber, the songs are used to advance the narrative, like something like Phantom of the Paradise and even even Rocky Horror Picture Show kind of start to feel like, the songs are detours from what's happening in the plot, right? Mm-hmm. And not entirely, obviously, like the music scenes are some of the strongest stuff in this film, but it is, the lyrics are more abstract. You're not sort of, ironically, for being a rock opera, opera is like you're literally singing out the narrative, and whereas in this, where, like the songs that Paul Williams wrote, which we'll also get into, they're kind of cut and dry ballads, pop songs. They're sort of, the lyrics are more vaguely kind of insinuating what the themes of it, are. And some of the songs are just songs that Paul Williams wrote at the time, just stuff that he had ready to go.
Yeah.
That were about other things entirely. Like I think that, there were, I think at the time his mother was dying. So there's material that made it into the film, that was really more about that. Not necessarily as much about, the plot of Phantom of the Paradise. Okay, so I'll just say real quick, like my initial exposure to this movie, I think probably came more from music. Like I feel like music heads really dig this film.
Yeah.
And in part because of the influence that it's had on, in terms of the iconography of some bands. We'll start with Daft Punk. Like, so this movie, major influence on Daft Punk, and
this was an early, like, this is big in France type movie.
Yes, totally.
That's where it was super successful on its initial run, where it was a bit of a flop in the United States, and then slowly gained a cult following, I think, for the, with the twin reasons of, it becoming more popular within, music heads, and then also, like, as De Palma becomes more popular and more of a cult figure, like this emerges as, a sort of singular early work of his.
So, as we know, if you've seen this film, and even if you haven't, I'm sure you've seen images of it on Tumblr. Like, it's just one of those things that just, it has so many iconic images that it makes the rounds, but you've probably seen this sort of strange Phantom-esque figure who's wearing this weird sort of like bird helmet, like space helmet, surrounded by modular synthesizers, and obviously that character, that's was a major inspiration for Daft Punk in the late 90s, for Discovery when they debut that look, when they become the icons, these sort of like cultural, archetypes that they've become now of the robots. And it's funny because I mean, Interstellar 555, I would argue, is a rock opera of their own that has a similar sort of Faustian plot about this label exploiting an alien band. And they even went as far as to collaborate with Paul Williams on their final album, Random Access Memories. So on the record, there's this song called Touch, where they do a similar bit to the scene where Swan, played by Paul Williams, is giving the Phantom a voice by running it through a vocoder and a series of filters and stuff. So that is on the record, and it sounds, almost identical.
Wow.
Yeah. So they wear it on their sleeves. They're big fans of this film, and they're big fans of Paul Williams. Of the three names that you could bring back from the 70s and 80s to be on your record about when music was music, they pretty much picked Giorgio Moroder, Nile Rodgers. That makes a lot of sense musically. Paul Williams would make a little less sense because he wasn't a disco guy, he wasn't a dance guy, but that film has a special place in their heart, so they obviously wanted to pay homage to that. Also, funny enough, there's a good chance the band Phoenix may have also taken their name because of Jessica Harper's character,
Jessica
Phoenix.
Harper's character. Wow.
Yes.
Oh my God.
On their first record, United, so there's a medley tune. I think that's the first record. There's this medley tune called Funky Square Dance where they sample the closing song in the film, The Hell of It, which was written by Paul Williams. So again, it seems to be that for some people, this is a very formative introduction to rock and roll, and just to the iconography of it, the imagery that could have only been conjured by, somebody like a Brian De Palma. And it's funny, actually, I've toured with them a couple times. Never thought to ask them this. I know that their running joke with the name Phoenix is that they just tell a different story for how they got it each time. I don't think there's an absolute definitive reason for it, but I'm gonna go ahead and just call it right here. I'm saying if they sample, come on, you sample the movie on your first record, you're definitely sending out a signal. But
we can start the rumor right here. Phoenix
exactly.
named their band after Jessica Harper's character in Phantom of the Paradise.
Totally.
You heard it here first.
All right, so we've been throwing out these character names. Let's give them a little context. A quick description of this movie is basically, it's like a mishmash of Faust, The Phantom of the Paradise, and The Portrait of Dorian Gray, right?
Phantom of the Opera, yes.
Sorry, Phantom of the Opera. And it's, in my mind, the three protagonists kind of represent these three different people. But basically, you have this character named Winslow who writes this cantata that's based on Faust. And you've got this record producer / label mogul, industry mogul named Swan, is Paul Williams' character.
Who was originally named Spectre.
Oh my God.
After Phil Spector, of course. Famous alleged wife killer and
yes.
Famed music producer. But yes.
Not alleged. He was convicted wife killer.
Okay, I got confused as to whether he got off or not because I always get that.
Well, there's the other dude,
with Robert Blake.
Yes, Robert Blake.
But he was gonna be named Spectre, but spelled like the James Bond movie or whatever, spelled differently. Nice. And then they changed it for. I think we're afraid to get sued. We will get into the legal, there's a bunch of legal bullshit that happened with this movie too that I can get into. But
because I know that both the name and also the record label name that they go with is also a problem.
Swan. It was going to be called Swan Song Industries, and then I think Led Zeppelin's label is called something similar, so they had to change that. And De Palma talks about in some of the special features, you can notice some pretty gnarly matte work to cover up some of the stuff that they had to change the licensing on. You can still see plenty of swan song imagery still in the movie, but I think the actual name they covered with kind of
Death
shaky
Records.
mats to try to change it to Death Records. Speaking of that though, the Death Records graphic design is really amazing. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's cool.
we should say this movie was production designed by Jack Fisk, who's basically considered like the best production designer of all time. He did this. He did Eraserhead. He did Mulholland Drive. There Will Be Blood. The New World.
Jesus.
He's Malik's guy. He's Lynch's guy. He also was, and I think still is, married to Sissy Spacek,
Who was a set
who
dresser on
was a
this
set
film?
dresser on this movie,
Yeah.
working for him. And she was on Eraserhead as well. And then obviously her kind of, and also she, her one of her first roles was in Malik's Badlands, and then her kind of breakout role into stardom would be in De Palma's Carrie a few years after this.
Yes. So bringing it back to the story, basically, yeah, you've got this sort of mishmash, this pop culture mishmash of these three sort of classic stories, and our Winslow, who soon becomes the Phantom, has his cantata taken away and perverted by this producer Swan, and in the process of the Phantom finds this singer who's just auditioning to be like a backup singer, who he believes is the true voice to carry out his music, especially after he loses it, in this sort of Phantom of the Opera type accident, where then it's what causes him to become the Phantom. In true De Palma form, he gets mashed by like a vinyl presser and is hideously deformed. And I mean, again, all this sort of symbology of the film, this sort of the recursive nature of it, the rotating record, the way the fact that the record that Swan's desk is just a massive like 12-inch record.
Yes, all these
and
visual motifs are very sophisticated and
and circular dollies that you can do as a result of that. Like,
yes. I
yeah.
mean, I something I really love about this movie is that exactly where it's like the whole thing is very clearly it's a fantasia, but it's like taking that kind of idiom and putting it in the milieu of like of real downtown rock and roll, reality of 1974. Like, so it feels simultaneously kind of on the ground while also being, you know, fantasy storytelling. I mean, like when he's trying to get a hold of Swan to confront him about stealing his music, and he gets sent to Sing Sing, and his teeth get pulled out and replaced by metal teeth, which is the start of his transformation into the Phantom. And then he escapes Sing Sing prison in like a delivery box, like in a very like, with no attempt to kind of portray that this is something that would really happen.
Yes.
But it and then that's the start of his sort of transformation. And then yes, his when he's smashed by the record presser, it's very like Joker-esque kind of origin story.
Totally.
And yes, his voice is destroyed, his face is destroyed. We don't see it. They hold off to the end. We do an early example of a De Palma first person sort of stalker shot.
This has some of my favorite POV stuff of his, because even the way they introduce Swan in the beginning, he's basically like Claw and Inspector Gadget, where like he's just this ominous hand, this sort of the Roman Empire thumbs up, thumbs down type of guy.
His sort of like slob of a henchman is like really looking towards looking at camera for
and it's the only way you know. Yeah, it's the only way you know it's a POV shot.
Yes, and like he's delivering dialogue to him for quite a while, where we're only seeing the kind of like gloved hand and hearing the voice of Swan, and then he's revealed later. But and yeah, so then Winslow comes back to the paradise, and basically starts living in this makeshift recording studio.
Yes, the irony is that he then needs Swan to get his voice back, right?
Right.
and the only way it can continue to work is with Swan. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of great irony and twists within within the script. Which, say what you will about the campiness of it, I mean, you do start seeing De Palma finding such an incredible, like such a unique auteur voice in terms of camera work, in terms of staging. He starts to kind of develop the vocabulary of the things that you then see later that become like hallmarks of his films, right? And some to varying results. I would say most of the visuals in this film are incredible. I will say his clunkiest split screen shot sequences I think are maybe in this movie, because half of them are just panning. Like, he just has to get to what the next thing is. So there's not a lot of visual information, but they're still fascinating to look at.
I will say, yeah, I hear that. I think a counterexample though is the bomb sequence where
That is good. Yeah.
Winslow is it's sort of like one of his first acts of violence and terrorism, on a larger scale, trying to stop this show from happening. But so what happens is the juicy fruits, which are
The
Swan's,
Shana Knobs, basically.
right?
Yeah. There's three bands. There's three bands that Swan produces that are kind of, well, not kind of. They're complete parodies of existing rock and roll bands at the time. You have, the Shana Nas, which were a nostalgia band from the early 70s and late 60s, early 70s. Complete like pastiche. I mean, that's where phenomenons later, like Grease, come up, where there's suddenly this 70s nostalgia for the 50s, which is funny. Again, it's always great to see another generation's nostalgia for another generation kind of happening in real time. But you've got the Beach Boys, of course, who are portrayed as the Beach Bums. Shana Nas are the Juicy Fruits, and then lastly, the Undeads are basically Kiss. With some sort of glam rock, literal Frankenstein. I mean, that's how they present him
Yes.
as the front man. And apparently, originally, I think De Palma was hoping that they could actually get some involvement from these bands, and I think Paul Williams was the one who kind of shut it down, partially because I think he was still making his bones as a bona fide producer and artist in his own right. But also just like, I mean, how are you going to get these real bands to basically mock themselves, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're being made fun of. I mean, these bands are supposed to be, they're representing selling out,
Yes.
and then Swan essentially steals Winslow's music and gives it to them to play, and so the Beach Bums are sort of practicing, rehearsing on stage in this elaborate stage show, and he puts a bomb in the trunk of their car, almost matching exactly the opening of Touch of Evil, and then that becomes a split screen where we're seeing like different parts of the stage and waiting for the bomb to go off and sort of catching everyone in the room together. And watching some of the making of stuff, it was pretty cool to realize that both sides of the split screen were being shot simultaneously on two cameras, which you don't have to do.
No.
But it was interesting that he was talking about designing, staging that sequence, that he had to make sure that the cameras couldn't see each other, basically.
Right. I mean, that particular plot point about having your work being taken away and perverted, to essentially become these capitalist little jingles just solely intended to make money and have no soul. I do wonder if this script in general is to some extent a riff on De Palma's introduction to Hollywood, because I know that he got booted off of his first real Hollywood film, which was Get to Know Your Rabbit. And I think he was like Tom Smothers, the comedian, who had like
Smothers, yes.
Tommy Smothers, had a difference in vision, and I could see that there's this film has a lot of parallels to filmmaking. Like Winslow is the writer auteur, Phoenix is a star he wants to cast, and Swan is the studio meddling with his picture, right?
Yes. No, I think that's absolutely correct, and and I Get to Know Your Rabbit is one of the few De Palma features I have not seen.
I haven't seen it. It just doesn't look. I mean, it's not well reviewed. It's
It
not.
doesn't look good. Also,
Yeah,
Orson Welles is in it as well.
sure.
But
Which is probably some of the reason why De Palma would have taken the gig in the first place, as
sure.
being a Wells fan.
But yes, it's no, I think that is, I think it says something about, I think you can obviously attribute that kind of parallel to filmmaking, but it's also a common practice in music as well.
Sure. Yeah.
And
Or at least that's where he would see, that's the empathy he would have for the musician, the composer, as opposed to the writer director, right?
yes, exactly. And I think, and I also think it's funny that, like, he, portrays the artist and the filmmaker as this deformed, beast that, like, is just so nevertheless talented that he, his vision must be protected and
And
embraced,
propped up by drugs and
Yes.
amphetamines, and in order to,
Right.
it's so funny because that when Swan basically like enslaves him via this contract, and things start, they don't get truly Faustian or Dorian Gray or Phantom of the Opera, I would argue, until latter half of the second act. You start really you begin to actually see the supernatural elements, kind of unfurling, and that the Phantom, or Winslow, is now beholden to Swan, who we realize is beholden to the devil. Like, he also serves someone, but yeah, the scene where he's like, basically, he's like, a little breakfast. He arrives at the studio and he just has like speed, and it's like, at that one, I had a moment where I was like, yeah, been there. Definitely had to Adderall my way to the finish line on some deadlines, but but yeah, just where it's like you eventually become a conduit for this thing that you are birthing, and that's solely your identity for the next 2 weeks, or that's what you're here to make. And I felt so bad for him.
Yeah. Well, and to the point that he's being literally walled off into the studio brick by brick,
Oh yeah.
And yeah, I mean, eventually Swan does, instead of kind of rejecting him, kicking him out of his place, putting him in prison, etc., I guess he realizes that he has enough value that he's worth, using and ringing out for every song that he can get out of him. And then,
Well, that's the funny irony of the plot too, right? Is that it's like Swan is so arrogant because of his laurels. I love how they introduce him, where he's just like, he brought the blues to Britain. He brought Liverpool to America, or whatever. I forget exactly what it is, but he's like, for some reason, responsible for every musical phenomenon of the past
right.
30 years. And then now he's brought the nostalgia wave of, the 50s, and that's how he introduces Juicy Fruits. But every time that Swan tries to meddle with Winslow's music, and Winslow winds up sabotaging it, the results are more interesting than what Winslow had initially envisioned. So that's the way that whatever kind of like idiot he had. I forget the Frankenstein character's name. This sort of like, what's the Meat? Yeah, Meat. The front man.
Oh
for
yeah,
the Undeads.
Meat is the glam rocker or whatever.
Yeah, the glam rocker. Beef.
Yes.
So a character like Beef, who's really just there as a punchline, is falsely envisioned as the proper star, but the audience only loves it because the Phantom kills him on stage, and people just think it's a riot and part of the show. So then Phoenix is brought in, and she's the one pure of heart. It's like every single time that he brings her in, or that Winslow's vision comes through, it only makes whatever Swan is trying to do more successful. And the whole movie, I keep just being like, just let him do his thing. He clearly knows what his cantata needs to connect with people, but you just keep fucking it up. Right,
but at the same time, it's like, I get like, this very odd looking dorky dude just singing on piano is not exactly gonna, pack in the teens here.
Totally.
I think it's something else that's really interesting is that, and that we should point out, just that I love, is that, the Juicy Fruits, the Beach Bums, and the Undeads are all the same band.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
They're just being recycled and reimagined as needed for Swan's vision.
That's
Um,
marketing 101, baby. How do you repackage the same piece of shit over and over again?
exactly. And then yeah, I mean, and then throughout this he meets Phoenix, played by Jessica Harper, who would
One of my
obviously
favorites.
yes, go on to star in Dario Argento's Suspiria. This is her first role, I believe.
Really?
And yes,
Because I would have thought it was Love and Death, because she was in a couple Woody Allen movies too, right? Like she's in
yeah, Love
Stardust
and Death is
Memories.
the next year.
Wow. She
So
was only
yes,
in like 5 bangers and then just disappeared from Hollywood, which is such a. I mean, she comes back for the new Suspiria, which was nice of
yeah.
them.
I
Yeah.
mean, you're right. I mean, she's in Stardust Memories. She's in Pennies from Heaven
Right.
with Steve Martin. And then she has some very small roles like in some major movies like Safe and Minority Report.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and then yes, comes back for the pieces of shit Suspiria to 2018 and Bones and All 2022.
She was in Bones and All?
Yes, I don't
Okay, I
remember
didn't
her
see
in
it.
that at all. It's not good.
Nice.
But yes, she's great. And she's,
Oh, Luca, you do more with less, man. Just
he can be good. I like
he
some
can.
Luca movies. I just think that
Suspiria is
making
bloated. We don't have to go
deciding to
into it,
make
but it's such a
Suspiria
bloated
look
fucking movie.
ugly and be about something was a really dumb way to go, in my opinion.
Yeah, and so I mean, just some. Not that the original Suspiria doesn't suffer from some campy acting, but like, there's no reason why in 2025 in 2018 that somehow the performances in the new Suspiria are worse than like the dubbed over.
Right.
Yeah. It's just I don't know. There's moments of it that capture me, but it's like again, it's too much money, it's too long, it's too many ideas, and what worked
Yes.
about the original is just it's a fairy tale. That's it with a
Yes.
great fucking score.
And it looks great, and like we don't question anything.
Yes.
Uh, but yes, I think she's really good in this movie. She has a really interesting journey as well because she is this kind of like pure of heart singer. I mean, she's introduced in like basically a cattle call for background singers at Swan's Place, which is like obviously is just like a total sort of transparent front for just turning them out as sex workers essentially, and sex slaves for Swan and his friends, and maybe they'll get to do a little singing on the side as well.
Right.
But it's all very sinister and horrible, and he kind of tries to help her out of that, and that's when he's framed and sent to Sing Sing. But she,
Also, funny name for a prison, Sing Sing.
yes. Well, yes. Yes. Perfectly aligned with the real prison in New York.
Right.
But and then so she with Winslow's help does end up sort of singing his songs, but then is sort of ensnarled in Swan's grasp, and to the point that then he seduces her and
She
is
yeah,
going to set up to marry her
she
on
really
live
does
TV.
become she's the Faust in this, because Winslow, I mean Winslow sells his soul out of necessity at that point, because his voice has been butchered, but she really is the one that kind of is seduced by success. Her character really changes after she gets to perform on stage as the star, and just becomes so hypnotized by the applause that her intentions seem to totally change until the very end.
Yes, and then Swan is going to marry her the opening night of the Paradise, and that's being live televised with the undead performing Faust, and then he's going to have her assassinated on stage for the ultimate tragedy. and Winslow kind of has to stop it. It's all very operatic.
Operatic, yeah. I actually, I mean, one of my favorite sequences in the movie is when we discover. Well, there's two. There's two fucking awesome scenes. One is the most Phantom of the Opera scene, and the other one is the most Dorian Gray scene. But when the Phantom is watching Swan and Phoenix like making love from a window above and just crying
through the rain,
through the rain, and then so he tries to kill himself. He stabs himself in the heart, but then he realizes that he's under contract. Swan walks out and he's like, "Don't be silly," and it basically explains to him. He's just like, you've this contract ends with me, and if you try to kill me, it'll kill you too, basically. So it's like whatever pain has been inflicted upon you through this stabbing, will be done if you. Well, I guess it's like, no, he can't. Sorry, this is very confusing. Basically, the Phantom tries to kill himself, realizes he can't, and then Swan appears and tells him that it's because he's under contract to him. And when the Phantom then tries to kill Swan to get out of his contract, we realize that he's under contract to someone else too. So it's like he can't be killed either. And that's when we realize that the true, the true darkness, the molten core of this perverse agreement is the deal that Swan has made with the devil to live forever, and which we see the next scene that's fucking awesome. And it's very De Palma because we're watching very different reflections in screens. Screen within
it's
a screen within
a
screen.
Flashback of some kind of Swan talking to himself in a bathtub, right?
Yes, and his reflection is the devil. He's basically, Swan is about to kill himself because, and it's so funny that it's Paul Williams because he's like, oh, to know that this beautiful,
the tiniest man who ever lived, and
so strange looking in a great way.
A very tiny androgynous man who nevertheless has like infinite swag.
Completely. Yeah. He's in proper what I would imagine is Paul Williams fashion. He's just like, to imagine this beautiful face aging. So he decides he's going to kill himself, and then his reflection starts talking to him and essentially, offers him eternal youth. But instead of being a portrait, I mean, this is to me the very postmodern De Palma aspect of it. The fact that Swan is always filming himself for these archives, it's a sort of strange plot point. But Swan is always in control because there's cameras everywhere in his domain, in his mansion, in his venue. So there's a lot of scenes where there's always something going on in the background, and Swan is always watching. So later he goes, you'll revisit scenes where Swan is watching what just happened and is able to make sense of it because he's got coverage everywhere. Or eyes everywhere, more so.
Which is very De Palma as well, who's obsessed with voyeurism and watching, and his movies always have a million mirrors in them. I'm sure when he found that theater hall balcony thing with all the mirrors, he was like super excited. In fact, I read that like that place where they built like the little secret door, that was in an entirely different city than they were shooting in, and so they had to shoot there and pretend it was part of the same theater because he loved it so much.
Well, and I mean that's the thing. It definitely it's great that actually winds up being a plot point because the document, instead of the portrait, the painting that protects Dorian Gray, the video of him making the deal with the devil is what is protecting him, and he has to hold on to it, So then the revenge, the final revenge on Winslow is that he destroys that, right? So we get this, we get this incredible reveal. That's also very sort of reverse Phantom. Basically, like Swan becomes a Phantom of his own, right? Because he's revealed with this mask, and as soon as it's, I mean, I don't know. As far as spoilers go,
we're spoiling all these movies.
Okay, all right, great. Like, just wanted to make sure.
Watch the movie, guys. It's great. You'll love it.
Yeah. And it should be, we should probably just say in the description of the podcast, if you want, we drop this next week. if you want to watch it beforehand, cool. If you're the kind of person that occasionally likes to just have a movie explained to you instead of watching it beforehand, that's fine too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think like to me, the bulk of everything I love about it is in the last half to a third of it. You know, I think that the stuff that establishes the world is very strong. The songs, I think, you know, it's some of it's great, some of it's not so great, just in my opinion. And it's just because rock operas are like some of the music in it always winds up being a little cringy to me. But there are some bangers. And then once we get all the incredible plot stuff, that's when it really, you know, that's when everything has stakes. It's more satisfying, and you get this truly like chaotic spectacle of a finale. If you, maybe Chad, walk us through that. You know, now that we know what's at stake, we know the pact with the devil. We know that, you know, Phoenix is essentially marrying this immortal man who wants to who basically wants to make a Faustian bargain with her. You know, have in the same way that he did with Winslow, where he has his own sort of underlings, but he is beholden to Satan. And Winslow, of course, knowing all this, is trying to stop it. What finale do we get here?
Well, you know, we have this like kind of great performance of like it's funny because the band that's the sort of like hacky band, like once they become the undeads at the end, I feel like they're like kind of good all of a
Oh, it's
sudden.
dope.
At
Yeah,
least
yeah.
like in their performances, and they're sort of doing this thing where they're creating a Frankenstein out of the audience.
Such a
And
dude, visually so awesome. Because there's also
yeah,
you see like nurses sort of stitching something up, you know, like but behind this operation table, like it's great. It's great.
so De Palma talks about how he used a lot of people from, you know, this experimental theater troupe that he worked with on this sort of obscure documentary project called Dionysus in '69,
Oh,
which I have not seen. But a lot of those people, those performers, and like I think one of them was like William Finley's wife, or like it was like a, you know, a big group of like his friends and sort of, you know, people that came from experimental theater and came from, I think, you know, Bard and stuff, and you know where he went to school, and he and you know a lot of these people are plants in the audience and stuff like that. So it's like that's like the audience reactions and their acting is actually pretty amazing, and it like
yeah,
leads to this like pandemonium feeling that you don't get in that many movies. And I think it's kind of because these people were sort of like leading the charge and sort of like helping design these sequences, and then you have like regular extras that, you know, are kind of going along with it.
sure.
um and so he so all of these things are sort of coming to coming to a head where our you know gross sort of henchman is, you know, has this, you know, insane sniper rifle, as you know this wedding is all kind of happening on stage, you know, among the undead playing and the television cameras and the crowd going crazy. And you know we're seeing through the sniper rifle, which is again another sort of common De Palma visual motif. And he's going to assassinate Phoenix on stage while Swan, you know, appears in his, you know, wedding suit wearing a mask, and Winslow stops the assassin from shooting her, and he instead hits the priest. Oh, actually, sorry. The henchman is the priest, not the assassin. But he gets hit by the stray bullet, you know, fatally wounding him, and you know, Winslow swings to the stage in this very, you know, sort of epic
Operatic.
Phantom of the Opera-esque way,
Yeah.
rips off Swan's mask and, you know, exposes him as this, you know, hideous, monstrous figure, uh, because, you know, Winslow has previously destroyed all the tapes and all of the evidence of this pact with the devil. So presumably his kind of like Dorian Gray-esque pact has been over, so now his beauty of as Paul
Yeah,
Williams
yeah, yeah.
is not protected anymore. So he looks like this kind of like, skinless, faceless, monstrous person. And they fight on stage. Swan tries to strangle Phoenix, but Winslow saves her and stabs him.
Thus
Opening
ending their pact. So now that he
exactly
stabs him and
opening
he's not
his wound in the
protected,
process. So their
it's a
pact
little convoluted, but in
yeah.
the moment it
None
makes
of
sense.
this really totally makes sense, but it's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah.
Because also, like, if the tapes were destroyed and the contract and everything, wouldn't their pact be destroyed as well? But who cares?
Yeah, yeah.
So they sort of kill each other, but as Winslow's dying, Phoenix understands who he was and embraces him. So it's like something of a happy, tragic ending, but again, very fitting within the genre of opera, and really exciting and effective sequence, just because
It's
the
such
way
chaos,
the stage
dude.
is designed is so great. Like the crowd work and this sort of like pandemonium that is happening on stage is really pretty amazing, and it's just a really thrilling sequence that from a young filmmaker. I mean, like, this is really I don't know, it's hard to kind of say, but it's like, because he made a lot of sort of borderline between student and experimental features. In many, it's so it's hard to kind of call what his first feature is. Like Murder a la Mode, like, is kind of, it is a feature, is a movie that is watchable, but is borderline a student film. And then he made his 3 films with De Niro: Greetings, The Wedding Party, and Hi Mom. The latter of which is kind of a masterpiece. But like his first movie that you would recognize as a De Palma movie to a more of a layman is Sisters, which is the movie he made before this. So he's really sort of stretching his wings with this movie, and then follows it up with another sort of studio Hitchcock homage called Obsession, which is very much a Vertigo riff, before he really kind of cements his status with Carrie, the film after that.
Right. Sorry, there was a cat trying to get out of my room. Sorry, Buster.
Okay. Very De Palma-esque escape was happening.
But basically, yeah, I mean, it's this is such a strange footnote in his filmography because it's very singular. It has all of his visual vocabulary. It has all the incredible camera work, the staging, the really, really thoughtful sort of, dollies and all these sort of motivated camera moves. But him as a writer, and this is a very hot take, so we can start kind of differing on this. But the way that I feel about De Palma is kind of how I feel about Nicholas Winding Refn, where like he's at his best when he's adapting other people's scripts. Because I think him as a writer, not always the tightest plots. Maybe that's not the point, but I'm surprised that for someone that is such an engineer, that someone that's so calculated and precise about the filmmaking is often so loose with the scripts and bizarre. There's a lot of I know that for you, Blowout might be your favorite. But for me, I mean, I don't know, man. The Untouchables, the later stuff, where he's adapting Mamet, and he's just so godly in his technique at that point. I tend to have ambivalence about his early stuff, like Sisters, where I'm just like, this script is just not great. Or Dressed to Kill, same thing, where I'm like, amazing filmmaking, I just don't totally know about this script. There's just things that I wish were elevated by a collaboration in writing in the way that he does later on down the line, even with something like Scarface, which is I fucking love that movie, but But yeah, I that's kind of my thing, because Nick Winding Refn, same thing, where I'm just like, dude, incredible technician, but dog shit screenwriter. Sorry.
Well, you're not gonna catch me defending Refn on this podcast anytime soon, and I that it's the kind of take that I do kind of tend to agree with on certain people. Like I definitely agree about Refn, where Drive is like his best and maybe only watchable movie, and which he didn't write, but at the same time, like, I think he did kind of. I mean, they threw out that screenplay, like, it's certainly
For sure.
like,
I just think it's
perfectly there on the page. I certainly think of someone like Aronofsky in the same way, who I think is an incredible shooter, but who has farts in his brain when it comes to like what he wants to say about the world, but like an incredible visual storyteller, which I'm excited about his new movie, which he didn't write, but with De Palma, I think it's like a little different. I mean, I certainly understand what you're saying, where and I don't make a distinction between these movies, because it's like, I absolutely love The Untouchables. I absolutely love the first Mission Impossible. I absolutely love Carlito's Way. Probably his best film that he doesn't have a writing credit on.
Sure.
But I also think that like he does have something very interesting to say as a writer, and I think some scripts are tighter and better than others, but and I'm not. Sisters to me is like, that is not one of my favorite of his movies. I think that that's a very good trial run for, what he perfects in Dress to Kill and things like that.
Yeah.
But, Blowout and Body Double and Femme Fatale are, three of my favorites, and kind of like pretty unimpeachable to me, as like, at least in terms of showing who he is as an artist and a filmmaker. It's funny the way he talks. If you obviously everyone should watch Noah Baumbach's documentary about him called De Palma, which is really just him very candidly talking through his whole filmography. And he really does make a distinction between the movies that he didn't write that are just kind of for hire, where he goes like, well, it wasn't my material, so I don't know, I just shot the hell out of it, which is kind of like what he talks about with The Untouchables. I think the movies thematically have a lot more in common than
totally. He has something to say.
Yeah,
it's definitely
even on the ones that he doesn't write. I mean,
it's not just pastiche.
Yes,
even if it was interpreted that way at the time. Because actually, I want to bring up one of my favorite writers, Martin Amis. If you've ever read the Moronic Inferno, which is a compilation of his interview and kind of like work for hire, like magazine work, he does an interview with De Palma. And a lot of it is, he's asked about the Hitchcock influence, but it's also, this is literally like, he does an interview with him in Vanity Fair in like 1984, I believe. So by that point, I think he's starting to get acknowledged as an auteur, but someone like a Refn, for much of his career early on, he's kind of seen as this sort of like, exploitation, sleazy genre guy. Yeah. And I will say, I mean, a credit to his writing, to me, my favorite of his screenplays is Body Double, even though it obviously borrows, a lot visually and plot wise from Hitchcock. Is it
Rear Window? Is the main one in that, but it's usually not. It's usually not a 1-to-1. But if you want to be reductive about it, like, Obsession is Vertigo, Dress to Kill is Psycho, and Body Double is Rear Window.
Totally. And in proper, Rear Window fashion, like, in proper De Palma fashion, I would say that it's like, okay, he's going to take these classic stories or these styles or these themes and put his own sort of perverse, voyeuristic, postmodern twist on it, right? So Rear Window's like, Body Double is basically like XXX Rear Window, right? It's sort of this riff about pornography, but also just, it's great that he literally, the things that might have been implicit in something like a Hitchcock film, that the nature of voyeurism is pornographic, here he makes it literal, he makes it overt, right? It's like the act of watching someone through a lens, through a telescope, is in the case of this film not only a striptease, but it's an introduction into this like sleazy pornographic underworld that he gets involved in. But
I mean, and it's the thing that I think that he, the things that he latches onto when it comes to Hitchcock. Like, Brian De Palma is a very interesting guy because he was part of the movie brats along with Spielberg and Scorsese and Milius and Schrader and Coppola's and Lucas. Coppola is the kind of godfather to all of them because he's a little bit older and more experienced. But if you read Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, like, they always talk about De Palma as like far and away the genius of the group, and it's always, that's always been fascinating to me. And, it's sort of like, and it's not as if he wasn't, didn't have wasn't commercially minded. He was, in fact, Schrader gave him the screenplay for Taxi Driver first, and he turned it down and gave it to Scorsese because he didn't think it was commercial enough, which is hilarious. But I think that De Palma latches onto Hitchcock for two sort of main reasons. One is that there's no one better in the history of cinema at designing visual sequences, deliberately.
Sure.
And that's what he is obsessed with doing as well. He hates the idea of coverage. He hates, he thinks about everything he's doing from if he's either reading a screenplay or writing it, that, how am I going to tackle this visually? And, that's what he's all about. And that's what Hitchcock was all about too. And the other part of it is the sort of like, which I think is a little bit more personal to both of them. And I think De Palma talks about it more candidly than Hitchcock probably was able to, either because of taboos at the time or his own lack of sort of self-reflection. But, there's a perverted quality to these movies that, like, I think is great and sort of innate in cinema, and that, like, the kind of cliched idea of, like, cinema was invented for, to shoot women, either being sexy or being killed. And, that's a reductive idea, obviously. But, there's something to these guys sort of, admitting that that's how they, see the medium and what the medium is best at. This the quality of voyeurism that is inherent in, the very notion of a person filming another person, no matter what they're doing. And
yes.
So
well, the decision to show
that,
one thing is the decision to not show another thing. I mean, that's
correct.
kind of, it's the nature of information and visuals in the medium of film is essentially like a striptease. I mean, I think of the movie Exotica, where it's just sort of like,
great movie.
I mean,
great De Palma-esque movie, but it's very much its own thing. Yeah,
totally. But it's this sort of commentary on the medium itself, where it's just sort of like, a good story is essentially this slow unfurling, unspooling of information, and the way in which you orchestrate or choreograph this striptease, if you will, in the context of a film like Exotica, is where you put the camera and where you don't put the camera. What information you're choosing to show at as in context to what you've seen before and what's being revealed. It's almost like this sort of, I wrote a script where I had this line where like this sleazy filmmaker says, like, ask any pervert, every inch of flesh is a reason to see another. It's just like this very campy script I was writing.
That's great.
But it's this thing where it's like, that is, I think for in De Palma's case, I think the voyeurism aspect of it, I think he sees storytelling as voyeurism, right? You're seeing into the lives of other people. I think
that's incredibly well put, and I just think that there's no one that thinks about that stuff more than him.
Yeah. And that is, it's funny. I should mention that the De Palma, his interview in Moronic Inferno is positive. It's defending him. It's basically acknowledging that, like, I would try to find a comparable filmmaker, but I mean, if you want to throw like a genre filmmaker, even this, you could almost argue that, like, it's not until Tarantino makes Pulp Fiction that he's finally taken serious as his auteur. The talent was always there. It's that people were reluctantly willing to acknowledge something like True Romance, or even Reservoir Dogs. Like the name of the essay is called like Brian De Palma, the movie Brute, right? So these interviews that he does with him, people are
As
initially right.
opposed to the brat, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, initially writing him off as this genre, this sleazy exploitation guy who's dealing with terror and sex and violence, and not really giving him enough credit for why he gravitates towards these genres and what he's trying to say about not just human nature but just the nature of storytelling. So yeah, I mean, I would
And
say it's
speaking,
like,
speaking of Dress to Kill, and it's funny to think about this in the context of like post Fablemans, but like the reason that De Palma is like this is that like in Dress to Kill, his the son of Angie Dickinson is secretly following around played by Keith Gordon, filming things on his, hidden like Super 8 camera. And in real life, De Palma did the same thing as a kid and found out his father was having an affair.
oh,
And found and had the visual evidence of it. So a weird sort of
that's incredible. I mean, yeah, that
yes,
would
I mean
send
it
you down the
explains it
path.
all. I mean, similar with it's Spielberg's story is much more sort of convoluted and different as well, but like as portrayed in the Fablemans. But like, yeah, I mean, it's all right there. I mean, the guy, that's where he got his obsession with voyeurism. I mean, my God.
Yeah, it's funny because there's also he does an interview with Spielberg as well in this book, and it's it's just Steven Spielberg boy wonder. Like, it's, to me, it's so
Yes.
dismissive.
Yes. I mean,
But
similarly,
yeah,
that's what they acted like he was, for a long time. I mean, you know, De Palma never got into his sort of prestige era. It's such an interesting career of sort of ups and downs. Like The Untouchables was a humongous hit, but was sort of like dismissed as, popcorn candy at the time, which is so funny because you watch it today and you'd be like, this would get 10 Academy Award nominations if it was released today. And then, he has the Disaster of the Bonfire of the Vanities and Casualties of War sort of back to back. And I mean, by the way, Casualties of War is a great movie, but it's like completely, one of the most depressing and upsetting movies of all time.
sure.
So not something anyone wants to remember or think about. And then, Carlito's Way and Mission Impossible are an incredible 1-2 punch. I think if people haven't seen Carlito's Way, that's truly one of the best movies of the 90s, and like,
Oh
in
yeah,
my opinion, a much better movie than Scarface, and I like Scarface.
sure.
But not too long after that, it's kind of over. Like, he never he's never been nominated for an Academy Award. He never really gotten he's kind of now only in his semi-retirement been getting the sort of accolades that I think that he's deserved, from sort of like it's now being led by like Letterboxd kids, and it's one of
Yeah,
the good reasons for their existence is discovering stuff like
I love that
Body Double
Tarantino's
and The Fury.
the only dude in the 90s that's still really trying to, like, I mean, even to me, in his own way, I wouldn't call it plagiarism, but it is the ultimate homage because he's not hiding these influences. He's talking about them in his interviews. But like, I mean, Jackie Brown does some very De Palma, very directly De Palma, like split screen stuff, and does a fantastic job with it. I think he even improves upon that form a little bit, but there's like but it is this idea that, like, yeah, I mean, he invented a lot of the language of what we now take for granted in film. He sort of helped pioneer these POV shots, these motivated camera movements, and really taking them to an extreme. And obviously, like, and sped up, slow down footage. Obviously, this stuff also has a deeper history in earlier cinema, but he really, you don't see a guy that just assembles, this
Well, speaking of
yeah.
speaking of Tarantino and kind of recent news here, it is very interesting to me. It was announced recently that some version of what Tarantino was now the abandoned 10th film of his called The Movie Critic, which allegedly was going to have some element of continuing adventures of Cliff Booth, the Brad Pitt character in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and now has been bizarrely revived in some form. I don't believe that it's the exact same screenplay, but might maybe contain some of the same material by David Fincher
I heard about that.
for
Yeah.
Netflix. And what's very interesting to me is like at first I was a little worried because I'm not sure I quite can see Fincher adapting Tarantino, especially in the way his last few screenplays have gone, and they've gotten so much more loose and sort of hang out and vibey, which really isn't a Fincher thing. But reading about what The Movie Critic was about, which was supposed to be heavily influenced by Taxi Driver, and then reading Tarantino's book, Cinema Speculation, which I highly recommend, and which has a chapter dedicated to what would De Palma's Taxi Driver had looked like,
Ah,
and essentially speculates what that film would be. And so, if you're thinking about whatever this film is going to be, as sort of Tarantino doing a Taxi Driver riff, in the style of De Palma, like I actually think that David Fincher is an excellent director for that material, if that's what it is. So who knows? We know very little about this, but apparently it's being fast tracked and it's being shot in July. So it
holy
seems
shit.
like it's really happening.
Is it going to be
Which is
Brad Pitt?
yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Wow. What a handoff there,
And it
dude.
takes
Yeah.
place about 10 years after the events of Hollywood. And if you've read the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood novel, which is also very good, it goes into a lot deeper things about Cliff Booth's character, and he's a huge movie buff and goes to see foreign films all the time in his off time. And so I think that there's some sort of marriage of potentially what the main character in The Movie Critic was going to be and Cliff Booth. I mean, Tarantino now writes in I think a somewhat different way than he did at the beginning of his career, where
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
where he just amasses material and sort of fits it into a narrative eventually, both through editing of the screenplay and eventually of the footage, where it's less of a tight kind of precise thing like Reservoir Dogs or Pulp Fiction are. So I
Right.
don't know, we'll see, but I do think that like I could very much imagine Brian De Palma having a heavy influence on this new, Tarantino Fincher collaboration. I do hope that De Palma.
Netflix, give De Palma a job
I
already. Let him
know,
at least
right? I really
produce.
hope that he gets to make another movie. I kind of doubt it, honestly.
Right.
I believe he's in his 80s now. His last movie called Domino was sort of one of these shitty sort of direct to video foreign financed action flicks that he did not have final cut or control over. In fact, I read that his first AD had to supervise some reshoots and additional shooting. I don't think he really even had a hand in editing the movie.
Ah, that
So there's
sucks.
some people that say that it's kind of good and has some of the juice in it. I have not seen it, so I'll probably watch it eventually. But and then his movie before that is called Passion from 2012, which actually is quite good and worth watching. Definitely not one of his best, and sort of a pastiche of his old work, but definitely entertaining, and kind of has the juice in it. With friend of the show, Numi Rapace,
Nice.
and Rachel McAdams. So I recommend that. And then, but really for me, like his last masterpiece is Femme
Femme
Fatale from
Fatale, yeah.
2002, which is kind of like his Mulholland Drive in a way, and it's sort of like self-referentiality and also fracturing of narrative into sort of dream logic. So I highly recommend that. We'll see if he makes another one. I think it's possible, but even if he doesn't, he left us with many great movies to watch and to think about and analyze.
And worth talking about, which
yes.
which we're doing today. I mean, I would be curious to see. I'm actually glad that like his influence kind of transcends the medium, and what we talk about here is like a music film that actually influenced bands, which never fucking happens. That's not right. That's just not a thing, really. I mean, I would argue that there's such few music films that capture or they're able to make such a strong enough visual statement and aesthetic statement that it then informs what a band does next. And I think that in the case of Phantom of the Paradise, it was just so rich in terms of concept, in terms of its visuals and musically. I mean, it's, again, we're talking about like, this just not necessarily even being something that winds up on a band's mood board, but that gets sampled for their actual record, and I think that's, and the last tidbit of I mean, I know that we were talking earlier about all the legal troubles that this movie had in terms of, changing, literally clashing with rock and roll, clashing with Led Zeppelin, who, just started a label called Swan Song, so they don't want to give that up. But also even in its title. So originally this was
Phantom
supposed to
of the Fillmore.
Yes, which is, I mean, I've played that venue. It's an iconic space in San Fran. And it makes, again, it's just sort of like, this was such a much more direct homage to rock and roll in its moment than he was legally allowed to make.
Paradise is a better title.
It's perfect. No,
like,
for sure. Phantom of the Paradise is dope, but there is a part of me that's like, I get why you wanted to call it Phantom of the Fillmore. I mean, if we're actually talking about real bands, I mean, it gets so abstracted through the humor of it that you forget that, like, that's Kiss, that's the Beach Boys, that's Sha Na Nas, that's the Fillmore, that's Swan Song Records, so in that way I think it's like people might have written this movie off because they weren't smart enough to make the connection yet that he was he was making a contemporary criticism of selling out and the nature of rock and roll, all the while trying to work in some laughs and not take itself too serious. I mean, I think it's a special film for that reason.
Yeah, it's a very entertaining film. It's a great, if you're, I always love pointing out to people that think of De Palma as just a sort of Hitchcock homage person. Like, go watch this movie, go watch the De Niro comedies, especially Hi Mom, and, kind of try to understand the sort of the broader nature of this, very interesting film and influential filmmaker. He had a lot of layers. Thanks for listening to This Podcast Should Be Played Loud, created, produced, and hosted by Chad Harbold and Alan Palomo. Please remember to rate, review, and follow on your favorite podcast platform, and keep up to date on new free and bonus episodes at patreon.com/This Podcast Should Be Played Loud. Our artwork is by Robert Beatty, and special thanks to Marie Barty and Jorge Palomo.